Thank you for these really wonderful talks. Once again, if you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A, or if you're a panelist at the conference, you can indicate that you would like to speak via the chat function. So I can start off with a question and I'll try to speak to both of your really excellent presentations, which I think both of which could, I think there's something expressed in both by something you mentioned, Vedit, about the desire for dissidence transmitted through mass culture. And I think something else that I notice in both of your presentations is a desire for, on the one hand, a science of politics, which is to say maybe the kind of Althusserian structuralist view of politics, but also what Rose describes as the sort of dialectic that could somehow resolve contradiction. And so I wanted to ask both of you how you think about sort of the paradox of queer and trans navigations of mass culture and science in service of liberation. I think in Rose's work, there's a kind of paradox of a desire to overcome science via some kind of ancient form of knowledge, but that there's no real resolution offered there because it's always routed through science. And I hear that as well, a kind of an impasse perhaps, but maybe one that you see as being overcome. So I guess I wanted to hear about maybe where you see successful struggles against this paradox. Vera, do you see the trans women's video as a kind of successful navigation of this paradox? And Rose, if you see any successful navigations anywhere. Thank you again.
I can go first, if you're still thinking. Thanks, Jeff, for that great question, the way you've formulated our projects together. I'm just thinking of, this idea of like a successful struggle against and with like thinking astrologically. Who says it needs to be successful, right? Like, I'm thinking about like, if we're gonna do a like queer feminist astrology or appreciation of astrology, then it seems to me through my like, not complete, but relatively wide knowledge of queer and feminist theory that this stuff is all based in failure. So you can have these two things at once and say like, okay, maybe astrology is about this point of full emergence of birth. And maybe in so doing, it lines up with biologically determinist ideas about like what is the self and how we come into our bodies, or even things like, nature nurture. It's like, okay, this is the person comes into being at the point of birth. It pushes against, or not pushes against, it maybe reinforces some kind of like biological determinism that we would like to escape. But then, like, if we think about what, Andrea Long-Chu says about the affect of feminism being about failure and the inability to do something, or even think about like Jack Halberstam, Queer Art of Failure, or even like, I think a lot about Lee Edelman and reproductive futurity, and putting these pictures of myself as a baby and then like the Princess Margaret as a baby in this presentation, and just thinking about him being like, yeah, like, fuck babies. Like, we're like, how, like, can we talk about this stuff together and say like, this is an image of like this possibility in the world, but also say it doesn't work at the same time. But there are also, I think people can forgive me for not including Alice Sparkly Cat's book, Post-Colonial Astrology, which came out 2 days ago in my presentation. So that like, I'm really looking forward to reading something like that and seeing like, I've just read the introduction, but seeing what are these possibilities? Like maybe I'm like, you know, it doesn't work, like it doesn't work, but maybe she has something else in there that I'm looking forward to seeing. So thanks for your question.
Yeah, and some are similar, but also really not, because I just don't know such thing as a queer struggle for. I just think queer is very specific to an Anglophone sort of context, and yeah, it's been reappropriated and used, and it's still a debate of how much it can travel, and it can travel, but you know, it's not like we can speak of an international queer community or something. Like I'm a much more I do think it's like local realities and expressions of gender you know, have a lot of weight and need to be amplified in many ways, but yes, working within silence and invisibility is also a strategy, depending on the context you're talking about, sometimes hegemonic. But yeah, so success and failure, again, and it's like, for instance, what would be a success? A success would be Antai's music video being funded, La Prise Malcon being able to pay for their rent this and next month, Santiago Balbin Gutierrez getting a laptop. I mean, that's success, you know. And that is also the fact that I shared these because there's PayPal's on them and there's Venmo on one of them, and so it makes it easier now to be in transaction in that way, in communication, because ultimately in any critique of capitalism now we would have to think of money as a form of communication as well, and a form of expression. So it's complicated.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for those responses. So first up, we have a question from Harper, who will unmute themselves.
Hello. Should I turn my video on, or I can just leave it off? Or yes? Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello. Okay, I have questions for you both. They're not wonderful questions, but I'm going to ask them anyways. So Rose, I'll start with you. So one move you made that I was kind of interested in is you sort of kind of played the astrological subjects like wholeness and coherency off of the kind of distributed or kind of amalgamated nature of the data subject, right? You mentioned that like with the birth picture, like you emerged whole. There's the sense of the kind of coherent whole of the astrological subject versus a sense of the subject as a kind of accumulation of data points. And I'm just wondering, like, you know, where this concept of like originary wholeness comes in astrology. Like, is it just the kind of circular nature of the birth chart, or like what kind of discourses of wholeness or of like an originary kind of unitariness you get in astrology, whether kind of contemporary or earlier? And then Vered, this is like perhaps a particularly ungenerous question. It's just that I'm also really interested in the kind of Althusserian concept of transition from one mode of production to another, and specifically kind of the concepts of like emergence and the aleatory and contingency in the later work. And so I was just wondering if you could give us like a little taste of the paper you didn't write, or the kind of the other work that you were thinking of presenting, you know, 18 months ago or whenever, when we first submitted the abstracts. But I've been grappling with the difference between kind of system and structure in Althusser. There have been a couple commentators who kind of position his later work on the transition between modes of production as in terms of like systems theoretical concepts like emergence. And so I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that. And that's it.
Thanks, Harper, for that question, or those two questions. This will probably be the last question. So if you guys, Rose and Vered, could be a little bit attentive to time in your responses, it would be great. But thank you again.
I can go first again. Thanks, Harper, for that question. Yeah, quickly, like, where does this idea of originary wholeness come in astrology? Like, this is one of the guiding tenets of astrology. So like when you come into the world, And by you, it's like a person or a nation. So I mean, Harper and I, we're good friends. I can come around to my house. I can show you like these charts that people, like different astrologers made of, say, like nations coming into being. So like I have a book that's like, okay, so like the nation of Israel is founded in 1948, and it has this reading of this whole chart of idea of like, this is something that comes into the world whole. And then this wholeness is then like played against like different factors as like time moves forward and the planets move. And then obviously in that example of like that state being founded, this is very ultimately problematic to say like, okay, like this something that is whole and comes into being, where it's like, okay, what other geopolitical implications of this, or like land being taken away, all of this stuff. But I will leave that for now, and Vera, take it away.
Oh, it's interesting when you spoke of like the fiction or crude reality of the birth of Israel as a nation, and thinking about Althusser. I mean, I don't know, I'm not like an expert Althusserian, nor I pretend to be, but he has this idea of emergence now of like his main strategy. He wanted to take over the state apparatus, right? So he has this same project of the birth of another state or a non-state within the state, or whatever you can debate. And that to me feels pretty old-fashioned. I mean, it feels unrealistic. It feels like we've proven again and again that it's not necessarily a strategy we should go for. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's all I can say to keep myself short and within the time frame.
So we have one more question from Stephen, but I'll read it aloud and then add it to the chat. For Rose, I was curious if you've researched the endurance of astrological thought prior to mass media, and to what extent is the continuance or resurgence of astrology in the 20th century precisely enabled by the rise of mass media? Not sure if basic question or two in line with Adorno. Well, you don't need to hesitate, Stephen. Well, I'll put that onto the Slack, and I think it seems like there's already in the day one channel some discussion about the aleatory dimensions of Althusser's thought and some other questions. So head over there at your leisure. But once again, I'd like to thank Rose and Vered, as well as the other presenters for today, Justin and Debbie, for doing such excellent work. And we look forward to seeing all, and hopefully all of you, tomorrow and Saturday for the next several sessions of the Political Concepts Conference. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful afternoon.